A tweet I'd like to open with before we get on to the usual stuff by Matt Kennard. Funny, they've never made a Bond film. By the way, have you seen the new James Bond film?
Is it out?
It's out.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it.
Fun fact, when I was a kid, when I was about 6 or 7, there was these James Bond weekly or bi-weekly magazines with these collectible items. And I'd go to W.H. Smith as a kid. And I was a huge James Bond fan and still am to this day. It's probably the only film I go to the cinema for. I haven't seen it yet. But anyway, elite tweet incoming by Matt Kennard. Funny, they've never made a Bond film based on the story of MI6 overthrowing Iranian democracy in 1953 because its prime minister nationalized the Anglo-Persian Oil Company.
Apples and oranges, bruv.
Elite tweets.
It is an elite tweet. Yeah.
I'll let you be politically correct while I sit here and say elite tweets. Bravo, Matt Kennard. Bravo.
The only thing that can link those two things together is the fact that MI6 is glorified as part of, well, kind of glorified because they show the bad parts in the more recent movies. MI6 is somewhat glorified through James Bond, and so international intelligence activities that the Brits have undertaken over the last 120 years are somewhat glorified through this channel, through this through these means. But I don't know. Other than that, I just think it's a movie, bro.
Thanks for the life story. Let's get on to the first topic of the day. And the first topic is, should we take a shot?
Not again.
Antonio Garcia Martinez, the GOAT, posted a tweet which said, "Which way Western capitalism?" And he's comparing tweets between, one tweet is from Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase. He's talking about, it's been about a year since my mission-focused blog post, and how looking back, it turned out to be one of the most positive changes he's made at Coinbase, and he would recommend it to others. And then the other tweet AGM has posted is, Apple's fortress of secrecy is crumbling from the inside. And of course, the issues AGM had with Apple getting fired after a few weeks. And Mr. David Sachs, quote, tweeting, exactly, companies can choose to be Coinbase or Apple. They can leave politics at the door and have a happy, productive workplace like Coinbase, or they can give in to boycotting mobs and be constantly roiled like Apple. What do you make of all this?
Bit of background on it. Essentially, Brian Armstrong 1 year ago came out and said, if you want to work for us, you basically need to leave politics at the door. You cannot be discussing anything on the left or the right. You can't be taking positions, and you can't be lobbying those positions in the business. Kind of, it led to some level of furore. I don't think it was that much. And they had
about 5% of the staff left. The existing staff have to fill the holes until they hired new, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and they got really good severance packages and everything. So I don't, if they wanted to leave, that was. So I don't think it was that big of a deal. I just think it got blown a little bit out of proportion, as does everything on social media. And it looks like what it's quite logically led to is Coinbase becoming a far more, I would say at some level, diverse, because you're allowing people to not discuss these things and therefore be a lot more mission focused and focused on the actual enterprise as opposed to anything around it. And it's also led to more success. Like, logically, that's what's going to happen when you focus everyone's attentions on one thing, and that's the direction and the strategic trajectory of that business. Of course, that business is going to do well. Okay, yes, you could argue that there's been tailwind, all kinds of support by the fact that the crypto market is absolutely ballooned over the last year and a half. Okay, there was a crash recently, but whatever. That probably supported them up until the IPO point. But the point is that Apple still allows its employees to have this constant battle within the business around certain things that Apple has to stand up for. And what you're doing is you're putting leadership between a rock and a hard place. And when leadership don't have courage, they can't take the stand and say, no, you guys have to get out. Why? Because Apple's a corporate behemoth now. They have to take a stance on these things, whether they like it or not. But at some level, if Steve Jobs was still in the job, you probably wouldn't be saying this.
Then again, the question is actually flip it the other way around. Would Steve Jobs would they drive Steve Jobs out if he were still here?
Yes and no. I think in Silicon Valley, he's lauded. Outside of Silicon Valley, he's also lauded. And therefore, in that scenario, I don't think someone will be pushed out of a business. However, we've seen how people can switch up on wealthy individuals, especially now, given that there's becoming more polarized points on the wealthy and, you know, these new tax initiatives being pushed by governments. So at some level, I think he would have been demonized, much like how Bezos has been demonized recently. And Musk is beginning to be demonized for his tax, but he's such a goat of the industry. I wouldn't see it happening. What about you? What do you think?
To be honest, I think most of this is top-down issues. I think Tim Cook is great, but I think if Steve Jobs were here, you wouldn't see this BS going on within Apple, which, you know, the AGM firing and all the Slack crusades and all that bullshit, that's old news. Now they're literally fucking up people's lives. Several people losing jobs. How is this going to end? It's actually, in my view, it's going to end with the only way is either Tim Cook or whoever's going to be in charge in the next few years wakes up and says, fuck, this is really, really impacting innovation, productivity, fucking up the company. I think it already has. Like, look at the recent Apple event, the announcements. In my view, like, there hasn't been real innovation on the iPhone or several of the products in years. This is as a hardcore Apple user. And so I think they're already lagging behind, but in a few years, they're going to wake up a bit too late maybe, and he's going to kick shit into gear, and he's going to he's either going to bring in all these new policies, but the longer this goes on for, the harder it is going to be to reform, to cause any sort of substantial change, to go back to, let's say, Steve Jobs era mentality. It's complicated. And like, this is why if you want to get a job, they say that, like, people ask us through Minority in Tech, should I get my first job in a corporate? I'm like, perception is reality. And the first 2 years of your career, sure, go to a big corporate. You learn well, you earn well, you get the stamp of approval, whatever bullshit people use approval. We still haven't completely shifted to a proof of work model. But go to it. But don't stay any longer than 2 years, because this is what happens. You'll be sitting there. You have not enough tasks to fill your time. You're overpaid. You have nothing to do other than just join Slack channels where you're just shit stirring, basically, twiddling your thumbs, and you're overpaid. You're not innovating. And we've seen all the memes on tech Twitter around the other day when Facebook went down. There was a funny video. It said, this is Instagram engineers trying to fix the problem. There was a bunch of supermodels who were dressed in high-vis gear, builders clothing, whatever, with drills and hammers, and they had no idea what they were doing, but they were dancing with the drills and hammers.
They were looking all sexy, but they weren't actually doing anything.
Exactly. Like one of them was drilling the ground or something. Like, she had no idea what she was doing. So behind every joke, there is a bit of truth, and exactly. that is FANG. And I mean, I'm not going to say it's all FANG engineers. We have friends who are FANG engineers. Some of them are actually, in my view, exceptional. But I know they're exceptional, and I know they're not going to stay there forever. I know they're going to go on to amazing things and building their own startups and whatever. So there's an interesting point just before you continue, before you move on. So the authoritarianism that sits within startups often is depleted pretty quickly, or dissipates quickly when startups become fully grown corporates. I think what Apple is now experiencing is the shift towards a fully fledged Americanized corporate entity that has to live within the boundaries of a political spectrum that the US is in. I think a lot of the times what you'll find in startup environments, Brian Armstrong being a great example with Coinbase that's not really corporatized yet, is an individual or a couple of individuals or a group of people who essentially run that business like an authoritarian regime. China is a great example of this on a global scale. Why? Because they've managed to grow at the fastest pace really seen since Japan in the early 1800s or whenever. And so economically, what they've done is what you do at a startup. You as a startup founder, you as someone that runs a company, needs to lay the groundwork and lay the foundation for development of that business in an unwavering way. And if you can do that, you essentially get a complete militant-like straightforward direction towards success. Now, there's obviously luck involved as well, but at the end of the day, you can't be an individual that just corporatizes quickly, because if you let too many voices in, you're going to struggle. And this is exactly what's happening with Apple, with large corporates, is that too many voices are being heard and not enough strategic direction is being taken. Yeah, and smart friends that I have in the industry all want to join startups where they're either part of the early team, the founding team. This is, of course, people who have already learned a few years of building or selling in the industry, because startups, when they are less than 20 people, that's the sweet spot. Between 20 and 100, of course, that's growing. It's great. It's still an exciting time to be there. But there is this whole notion of once you get to 100 plus employees in a tech company, it's not going to be a really fun time, to be honest. And we've seen this with Tom Blomfield of Monzo, where, I mean, there are always rumors, but people say there are other reasons, whatever, blah, blah. But not just him. We've seen it with many founding CEOs who end up leaving when the company gets too large. Look, I like it. I like the early days. I like to build. I don't like to go on to, running a corporate. I like the early days. So like Tom now, he's angel investing and doing all the early stage stuff and advising, which he's always found fun.
Interesting guy, him. If you don't follow him on Twitter, do follow him. He actually posts blogs of, particularly in the UK, what to think about when setting up a business and how to interact with VCs and all of this good stuff. So shout out Tom Blomfield on Twitter.
Next topic.
You came across this LinkedIn post by Mr. Fred Destin. Do you want to fill us in on what this LinkedIn message is? He also posted on Twitter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. It's actually great coming on from the previous topic of where to get your job if you are in the market for a job. Fred says, talent wars in London seem absolutely brutal these days. Wage inflation is brutal. Anyone is liable to be poached. Every one of our startups in his portfolio reports that their team members are being approached almost continuously by everyone from other startups, FANGs, and corporates. With the advent of distributed organizations and remote work, competition is global. It could be Tencent or Slack knocking at the door of your organization, carefully mapping your team looking for openings. Some seed stage companies have reverted to staying completely stealth on LinkedIn and asking their team members to remain stealthy, though they are likely to find them on GitHub anyways. This raises the stakes dramatically on people operations to act preemptively. Firstly, identify, promote, compensate emerging and homegrown talent. Number 2, continuously look at refreshing option grants and compensation. Number 3, track any employee at risk. Ultimately, this is when a serious investment in culture, talent, and people as a strategic pillar of your business becomes paramount. And design and implement a distributed talent strategy. You can't run from this.
It's a very well-written tweet. Why? Because it gives the problem, it gives a solution in the tweet or the LinkedIn post.
Oh, great. Problem solution, the consultant.
Yeah. It's not even that. It's that Twitter has just become this cauldron of people throwing out random quotes and it's sticking sometimes. But I like it because he's quite to the point and he's honest. Like not a lot of people, not a lot of VCs would come out and say stuff like this. So respect for him coming out and saying it. It's a lot harder to do what he says you should do. Compensate emerging homegrown talent. Yes, but what if they're not ready? And often they won't be ready. So you have to have the courage to actually push someone into a more senior role and help them grow in that role, which a lot of people don't have the time nor the patience for. I don't know. What do you think of, especially the compensation one, which is interesting to me? What do you think of that?
So there is a huge problem and always has been in London and the UK market, specifically for engineers in tech, software engineers. And what I mean by that is many people I know graduate from these coding boot camps in the US, starting salary immediately $120,000 immediately as a junior software engineer. Whereas in the UK, a junior, you tell me, take a guess, what is a junior software engineer salary?
I wouldn't guess anything above 50, 60K.
It's 25 to 30,000 pounds. Putting it about max 40 USD. Compare that to the 3x 120k USD in the US. Of course, this is more prevalent in, let's say, San Francisco Bay Area, New York, Austin, now probably Miami. And yes, the cost of living is higher, but cost of living is fucking high in London too. It's one of the most expensive cities in the world. Why are software engineers being paid 25 to 30 grand? There is a shift, and Fred is touching on that as well. And I'm really glad about this because I sound like a broken record now how much I've complained about UK and European tech VC landscape just being dinosaur mentality in every sense. It's about fucking time. The power is now in the hands of the employees, specifically the technical employees, because they are the ones who build. Without the builders, there's no damn product. A lot of people can sell. As Mr. Ravikant says, he says selling it just gets very noisy. Everyone and their auntie is trying to find a technical co-founder. It's like, please just build this app idea for me. It's like, what the fuck is in it for me? So yeah, I'm really glad about this, especially for the technical people. They're the pillars of the industry, and it's about time London got a little shake up. Typically, employers wouldn't care much, but now, as Fred has outlined, they're probably shitting themselves, and I'm glad.
Would you pay more to someone that is working in your business, that's working at maybe 60 to 70% of their capability, and what you're struggling with is going and finding someone to hire to take on that more senior role? Would you promote that individual who's working at 60, 70% capability and pay them more, because obviously you have to pay them more if you're promoting them? Would you do that in that scenario? I think this will highlight how difficult a problem this is for founders to deal with.
Great question. So rather than, well, some people would say, yes, let's promote that person, as Fred is outlining here. Some people would say no, because if they're at 60 to 70%, I want to optimize for the best, so I'm going to go into the market. But here's the problem. You then run into a concrete wall. You run into, there's a dead end, because all of our friends with startups, the number one thing they all struggle with is hiring. In the US, but especially in the UK, because talent is scarce. So great question. I genuinely don't have an answer for it. And I guess if I did, right now we would have a decacorn that we'd be running, but we don't, because we don't have an answer to that question. I don't know how to attack that. I suppose the only way would really be, you're like, okay, you do something similar to, I heard David Sachs did this, but it's for his VC firm, but still you could do this for your own company. You hire hiring managers, basically. And their job is, their specific job is to find the best talent. Of course, if you're early stage, yes, you might not have the funds for this. So my thoughts are with you.
I mean, he even said in that snippet where he gave that away, is he's paying like $1 million a year just to have these recruiters find the right people. Like, is it worth it? Does it give you the return? If you're a newly funded startup, is that the right way to do it? Do you take a risk on someone?
Let's be honest, most recruiters in the UK, they're not exactly the brightest bunch. They are, I mean, I know some bright recruiters, but exception to every rule. Majority of recruiters, you go to the city, you go to central London, West End, you just find them working 5 hours a day and spending another 5 hours in the pub. So
it's networking, bro. It's networking.
How you can't really compare that to, let's say, a Bay Area technical recruiter who studies their craft, who knows what to look for in the GitHub. Even finding the hiring manager in the UK is going to be difficult, because there are not many people that specialize. I mean, I'm connected to a few of them on LinkedIn, and they're doing exceptionally well because there's not many of them. They're in demand right now. So I don't know how to answer that. I suppose similar to the US, as more funding flows into the market, as it has done in London in the past year, we have seen slight improvements. The better I won't say the better your startup is, because a lot of shit startups are getting crazy amounts of funding. I would change that to the better your pitch is and convincing people to give you money, then the better chance you have of implementing these changes, of bringing hiring managers, of maybe just paying big bucks, paying the top bucks, and bringing the best talent generally.
We're back with another episode of Cyrus Yari Believes Everything in Life is Sales.
Facts on facts.
Yeah, trust. What's next? Frank Rotman at FinTech Junkie. That's a great app, by the way, for Twitter. FinTech Junkie. At FinTech Junkie, Mr. Frank Rotman posted a tweet or a thread talking about how the VC landscape, or generally the financial markets, are in a bit of a confusing state. I think anybody who knows anything about financial markets would probably agree with him. Why? Because he talks about the VC landscape being blown up. He talks about the public markets being on fire. He says the adoption of Web3 technologies is unlike anything seen before. Separating bubbles from mega trends is really difficult. It's the stuff of dreams and nightmares. And then he posts a few thoughts on this. And he fundamentally talks about what he's seen historically. So he talks about a book that he read, a seminal book, he calls it, that was published in 1841 that many see as the OG of crowd psychology and mania. It's called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by Scottish journalist Charles Mackay. And then he basically goes in within this 9-thread tweet to say not all sort of hot trends are flashes in the pan. There are some things that are mania and there are some things that not. And I don't think he really comes to a conclusion, but he's basically taking this Cartesian doubt view, this skeptical view that life, you've got to think about these things in life in a skeptical manner to save yourself from essentially financial ruin. And it also harps on something that all tech bros and basically everyone in this industry kind of knows about following the success of Peter Thiel after his book 0 to 1, is that mimetic theory is René Girard's famous philosophical take on how humans interact and have grown culturally, kind of builds on this as well, around how everybody wants something that they have seen in other people. So essentially it's the mimetic theory of desire in the sense that you always want what other people seem to want. It explains why we get into conflict, because often we want the same thing. And then we go through a process of entering a period of conflict, that conflict finding a scapegoat, an individual, a thing, a culture, something that they can demonize and fight back on. And then once that scapegoat is gotten rid of, they re-enter the cycle, etc. This is exactly building on this idea of mimetic theory. Why? Because he's saying we can't tell right now whether we want these things to be successful and therefore they are becoming successful. For example, NFTs blowing up out of the blue. Yes, there may be some utility to them, but at the same time, a lot of it's driven by, as we like to say, FOMO and greed, right? And the only reason FOMO and greed exists is because you want to copy other people because everyone else is making money on these things. So the point is, keep a Cartesian doubt view, keep a skeptical and intellectual skepticism around these things to ensure that you are keeping your head above the water at these really dangerous times. Because what we could be entering is something beautiful and one of the biggest, most impressive technological booms in the history of humanity, or it could be the next biggest boom in a bust in history. So I don't know, it doesn't get to a point really for the tweet thread, but it's very interesting that it builds on that mimetic nature. What are your thoughts?
There was actually an article by AGM on this the other day, which he was touching on the dangers of optionality and having too many options in life. And what he means by that, I think this was well explained by one of my favorite authors, Take a Shot, Cal Newport, who talks about the dangers of people who jump from project to project to idea, from just career to career. And he talks about this in Be So Good They Can't Ignore You, where he says not just the power of compounding, but the power of, for example, in careers, passion develops from getting very good, from spending a lot of time at something, getting very good. And as a result of your experience and getting very good, you develop passion. Now, the danger with this space, and summarizing as Frank Rotman says in his final tweet, he says, not all hot trends are flashes in the pan. Some outlive mania and become the stuff of the future that replaces historical norms and preferences. But it is worth keeping one eye skeptically open and the words of Charles Mackay close to heart just in case. Well, it's difficult because last year on tech Twitter, for example, 2 years ago, you had this whole SaaS craze. Last year, you had this whole e-commerce and fintech craze and people moving to Miami saying Miami is the future. It's everything. This year, it's people saying, some people even saying, forget Miami, you just have to be remote. I think there are people who launched companies on top of, let's say, GPT-3, who have now shifted their focus completely to NFTs. I'm sure and I hope that they become exceptionally successful. But it seems in the industry, most people have fucking lost. There just is no focus. There is no notion of what Cal Newport talks about. You stick at one thing. What's his name? Andrew Wilkinson? Is that his name? From Tiny Capital. He had this long thread. We'll throw that up on. He's talking about how he basically became numb to everything. Like he had no interest and he couldn't get out of bed. After much reflection, after this long thread that he explained, it was due to literally frying his dopamine receptors in a nutshell. And obviously you mentioned our friend, Dr. Cam Seppa, and his great article on Medium, Dopamine Fasting 2.0. it's dangerous. Like fucking, we've said this before, get off Twitter. This is why I take breaks from Twitter. These people are on here every day, they see a new trend every day. One day it's Miami, one day it's, a few years ago it was Bitcoin. Now it's Bitcoin shit. It's all about Ethereum. Now it's NFTs. Now it's investing in JPEGs of apes and monkeys and shit. It's fucking crazy. And how are you supposed to, and some of these are, as Frank Rotman rightly says, some of these are, and you're pissing yourself right there because you know it's funny, but it's true.
I know it's funny.
He has a point because he's saying some of these could be stuff of the future. How can you distinguish between what is stuff of the future and like what is the 99% of bullshit that tech bros are talking about every day on Twitter? Like it's hard.
Tiring, man. It's so tiring.
It's tiring. How about you pick one thing and you stick at it for several years? God forbid anyone on tech Twitter did that.
It's a tangent, right? So your tangent is accurate in the sense that a lot of this FOMO, greed, etc., is basically people hopping from thing to thing that all sits within the tech space, right? But it's opportunism at its finest. It's fundamentally people seeing a ticket to high net worth and jumping on that plane.
That definitely, but I also see it as people may be afraid to do the work. People maybe it's not within their
subconsciously, yes,
subconsciously, because they don't want to do the work. They want to take the easy route and the shortcut. There is another side to it which does make me very happy. For example, Tom Osman, he was interviewed on the Not Investment Advice podcast. We had a little Twitter exchange talking about his $1.3 million sale. I believe it was of an NFT or something. He bought it, or his investment was $5,000. He exited for $1.3 million.
Jesus Christ.
And he's a family man. He's a great guy. He's been helping many people, hustling online for many years. Previously, he was at MakerPad, helping people launch no code. Now he's got into this whole ETH and NFT space. And like, he's a family man and he wants to like, I don't know, just escape with his family, go live somewhere better, build a better life, whatever, because, you know, everything in the UK is becoming a shit show. So stories like that make me really happy. Someone who's a family has been working really hard, has been helping others for several years. And like, this is a great big break. If you ask me, what would you put $1.3 million in? For me, it's Mr. Terry Smith can take all of my money and that's it. Oh, I'll keep 10% for speculation, angel investing, but Mr. Terry Smith will get the funds. But my point is, it's great stories like that. But generally, aside from these great stories that make me happy, I think it's usually Tom's been doing the work anyway, regardless. Like most people are afraid to do the work. That's the conclusion from my point of view.
What about how nothing is normal anymore, but looking at it from the lens of venture specifically, something that was very interesting that I saw on Twitter, or I think you sent this to me on Twitter, was another tweet by the good old stat man of VC, Mr. Ethan Mollick, or E. Mollick on Twitter. He tweeted a little paper that said, "The importance of investor mood for startups. This paper shows that on a day with sun, investors are happier and significantly more likely to fund startups. Also a sign that the decision to fund early stage startups is not as rational as some investors would have you believe." Yeah, and I guess after that, there was a retweet by Keith Rabois saying, "Must be why we are leading so many investments since we moved to Miami." If you had to take if you had to take irrationality into a nutshell, it's not even irrationality, it's just like human nature. The
science,
impact of human nature.
Biology.
Science. If you had to take science and bottle it up, and you basically just put human nature, if human nature and finance had a baby, this is the outcome. This is the baby that would come out of it, right? It's fundamentally human nature that drives a lot of our decision making. It is fundamentally our prerequisite human being, whatever we are as human beings, that drives our ability to make these decisions. And so, number one, putting anyone on a pedestal like Terry Smith or Buffett or Munger or whatever is probably the wrong thing to do, because they are subject to the same.
Dare you?
They are subject to that. I had to get that in there. They're subject to the same, inconsistencies, irrationalities that all humans are.
Munger and so says that himself. He says, "Be aware of anyone with strong ideology. Stay far away."
Correct, and he's absolutely right. And in fact, the fact that he is aware of that is brilliant in and of itself, right? It shows that he's aware of the downfalls of human nature. But the point that it gets, sort of interesting is that even the people involved in this. So, for example, Rabois, who's based in Miami and has been a massive champion of VC in Miami, is joking about the fact that this is accurate and this can be true. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know whether these guys are trolling. I don't know whether these guys just don't give a shit and don't think that it's important. And maybe it's not important. They're making their money. They're living life in Miami. They're having the sun. And maybe because we live in Britain and we live in a country with no sun, it makes us more rational, quote unquote, or skeptics, if you will. But I don't know. It just
put it this way: in the morning, give me 6 organic eggs with Iranian bread and some cheese and walnuts on the side with an Iranian tea. Just give me a full big breakfast. Then take me to the gym, to the power rack. Give me a Mark Rippetoe starting strength training program. Then I come outside and it's 30 degrees. And the weather app on the BBC app, it says the UV is either VH, which is very high, or E for extreme, as it was in Southeast Asia. And the sun is shining on me, as DJ Khaled says. How do you think I would feel? I would fund everything and anything. But here's the thing. And you'd be like, oh, but then you'd be bankrupt. But here's the thing. You are exactly right in that we are too rational, because you can't put rationality on everything. We've discussed this before. This whole skepticism, I know a lot of it is cultural. I know a lot of it is regulation, a lot of other factors. But you are right. Just not even around this, even around basic principles of, I want to make this life decision. Europeans and Brits are very, very risk averse with pretty much anything. And me and you, whenever we speak to an American guest or we speak to American contacts, whatever, we get off the call, like, I'm just pumped. I'm like, fucking hell, let's build this empire right now today. And then you hang around with a couple of Brits and then like they just try and dash your dreams and hopes away. So
it's not that bad. Come on.
It is that bad.
On that point that you raised around power laws, there was a tweet by Mr. Trent Griffin, who works at Microsoft, who does a great...
He wrote the Charlie Munger investing book.
Exactly.
Not the almanac, but the smaller investing book. But carry on, sorry.
Yeah, so he has a website called 25iq.com. And he basically has this post. This is a short blog that he posted back in October 6th of 2012. On October 6, 2012, he basically talks about what he calls path dependence and the Matthew effect of VC performance. All right. What he's basically talking about is the fact that historically, now bear in mind this was written in 2012, just before the boom in VC occurred, 20 firms, or about 3% of venture capital firms, generated 95% of the industry's returns, right? And this is a beautiful representation of essentially how VC performance is completely based on a persistent power law. And that power law is based on what we'd call path dependence, i.e. it's how you can think about the preferential treatment that one gets from being in an environment. In other words, what social scientists call the Matthew effect, of being in an environment that's self-perpetuating. And what that means in practical terms is that historically, if you were in Silicon Valley, you had the sun, everyone happy, everyone vibing off each other, everyone putting checks into each other's businesses, a small group of people, a relatively small group of funds. What ends up happening is everybody starts benefiting from each other. However, what happened in venture was that path dependence got even further amplified because you had 20 firms right at the top, 20 firms that started stuff that essentially had the right backing and had the right clout to do really well, started working together really well. For example, you've got your Benchmarks, you've got your Sequoias, you've got your tier one firms, right? Your Andreessens, etc. These guys, because they were all around each other, started doing really, really well. What happened though, and I think this is happening in the last 2 or 3 years, is that venture is now diversified beyond borders of just Silicon Valley. And you've now got a system, you've now got a sudden boom that's emerged that's beyond this geographical Silicon Valley base. And what you've actually got now is it's kind of shifted onto Twitter. Twitter has become the new location for a lot of this success and this path dependence. So the point I'm trying to get at is this is very much linked to that previous thing we were talking about around where that type of thinking perpetuates itself. if you're positive, great. There's sun giving you positivity, endorphins running, fantastic. High vitamin D, all of that shit. But essentially what it's doing is that if everyone is in the same scenario there, you've also adding on the mimetic theory of mimetic desire, i.e. people wanting what other people around them have, and you get this hotbed, this sudden emergence of complete growth and crazy fueled money-making movements in that industry. And then suddenly there's a ballooning growth. And what's exacerbated that more recently is the sudden growth in technology. And so all of these things coming together have created an environment for VC that is path dependent, but now might be changing. And we don't know how it's going to change. And I think that's what is leading to this issue that's fundamentally built around what Frank Rotman's tweet thread was, which is everything seems nuts. We can't tell if it's a bubble or we can't tell if it's a megatrend. And I think this is why. It's because everyone's been living in La La Land. And once they come out of La La Land, who knows what's going to happen? Anything else you want to talk about?
The generational shift within VC, which was a Fortune article. We're seeing a lot of big name VCs, such as, shout out to the Iranian OG Bijan Sarbet of Spark Capital, who has stepped down. And he made a tweet and a fantastic blog post. He's stepping down to, I don't know, spend more time with his wife, investing in climate change, with his family. He's a great photographer. But anyway, he's stepping down, and so are a few other real OG VCs in the Valley. And there's this whole discussion of, there's this whole generational shift. Is it becoming a young man's game? A lot of things are changing in VC right now. Answer to that is Sean Puri. His tweet, which said, Austin Allred of Lambda School said, seeing more and more founders raise their entire rounds from other founders. Even name brand VCs are being cut out. Must be brutal to be a VC right now. To which Sean said, yup, has been a quiet secret for a while. I have a group of 8 founders and we will lead your full round before VCs can zip up their Patagonia vest. I suppose that sums up what's happening. We've said this several times before, we're moving to a market of the solo GPs, the emerging managers, the young guys, the people who are literally ear to the streets, you can say. And a lot of the older guys, look, they've made, the other thing is, you talk about humans and psychology and incentives. They've made all the fucking money there is to be made in the world. Like, they've made hundreds of millions, some of them several billion. At what point when you're approaching 50, it just depends on personal preference and how your character is. But I suppose for most of them, it's just a case of, okay, well, I've probably lived more than half of my life. I have a great family. I've made a shit ton of money. Let's go and invest in things with my own money close to my heart and spend time with family. Like,
it's totally never enough, though. It's never enough, is it?
And going back to what we discussed previously, this mimetic desire, and then the whole hedonic treadmill, and lifestyle inflation, and the people you're around, it's very tough. Like, hats off to Bijan for stepping down, but I still see a majority of GPs, OG GPs, who will stay in the game despite one side of them wanting to get out of the game, but they won't, just purely for hedonic treadmill, mimetic desire, lifestyle inflation, FOMO, greed, all of that bullshit, because that overrides the rational side of their brain, which really the rational side of the brain, I suppose it may be a good way to end, is a quote that we are nothing but a fart in the wind in the cosmos of time, and we are all irrelevant. Peter Kaufman talks about this. 13.4 billion years, 13.7 billion years the Earth has been around, and our time here is we're basically irrelevant. We're particles of dust. We're irrelevant.
What's your point, though?
My point. That's the point. That is the point. That is the point. That is literally the fucking point. It's hard when you're in that environment. I mean, you become the average of the people you spend the most time with. And in the Valley, if you're around the same type of people all day and night, you're stuck in this fucking echo chamber, then you're going to be stuck in the echo chamber. It's going to be, no matter how rational you try to be, even the most rational people will probably get stuck. So big hats off to Bijan and the other GPs who are stepping aside. There is more to life. If for you this is fun and play, or it always is, But everyone evolves, everyone's preferences change, so hats off. But Sean's point is exceptional, and he's right. Why would you take a VC, unless it's like a tier 1 VC, why would you take a VC's check who usually brings no value add, brings usually no operating experience, usually does fuck all, to be honest. If anything, it's negative ROI for you, where you can take the same check from a group of angels or a syndicate of angels who have operating experience. Majority of them are CEOs. They have insane contacts. Within a few days, they just get a bunch of venture-backed startups to sign up to your product if it's B2B. And they're always there to help. It's win-win. If you're a founder, I think there's no better way to go than just take money from as many angels as you can, really.
And help your mates one up as well at the same time, right? Helping everyone level up together instead of helping a fund and their LPs level up.
Help everyone eat at the table, help everyone have some cello kebab. And on that note, it's very late. I've got this humongous bright light shining in my face.
Is that why your head is so bright and the bigness of your head?
Bright and shining.
Shining bigly.
Shining bright like a diamond. And I'm going to go and have a lovely steak right now.
What are you smoking tonight?
Tonight, there's no Davidoff. Davidoff London is closed. It's almost 10 p.m. soon.
Dead.
So hopefully the Sahakians can serve us in the next few days on a visit in their sampling lounge in the shop on the 2 seats, so we can have a nice Davidoff or something, or a Nicaraguan. Anyway, what are you having?
Hoyo de Monterrey San Juan is the next one on the list.
Epicure number 2. Okay. Anyway, rationalvc.com. As I said before, just do not go on the site, because at this point we're putting up all this, like, we're going to put up a paywall probably soon. This is me giving my fake Tony Robbins pitch, where with a 297 course. It's going to be a paywall soon. Better sign up now.
10 to go.
But yeah, anyway, rationalvc.com. The essays are there. We write 1 essay a month. We've got over 1,000 subscribers, including big boy VCs and founders and everyone, big boy and big girls. We don't discriminate. And we upload only some of the free essays. If you want all of the free essays, you just subscribe, put your email. And if you want to get a taster, there's free ones on the website for you to read, sample. And that's about it. I think next one may be in person. Get the Davidoffs out. We're going to be in person.
Sounds good.
Subscribe, like Mike Chucks. Peace.